content creators, you can't work in a bubble. You have to understand all the physical logistics and everything else that goes into the environment in order for the content to seamlessly work. And I think that led to that quote. That's sort of our mantra. It's not just what's on the screen, it's what's around it. It's what you did before you got to see that thing and what you're going to do after. Really informs the design of content for us.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing well. How are you?
I am fantastic. I have a question for you.
Okay, well, good. I'm really glad to hear you're fantastic today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Can you tell me a story without using words?
Yes. The end.
The end. That's gonna be great for a podcast.
I know. Using audio as the medium that really went in well for that question.
Yeah. Well, hey, the reason I asked is because our guest today focuses on visual storytelling using content and media to tell the story versus, specifically a film or specific audio content. So it's a little bit different way to kind of elaborate on an IP or a particular story.
Yeah, this is a really cool interview. Eric Hungerford is the president of Mousetrap, which is a multimedia visual entertainment company working specifically with location-based entertainment. So theme parks, attractions, observation decks, anywhere where people are in a physical space, and they're often projecting onto multiple different types of services, whether they're walls or they are castles, or I would say anything in between, to create a story, to create a visual immersive experience.
What I thought was really fascinating was how he talked about the process, to go from the idea to the execution. And excuse me, that once you bring it to the client and you start showing it that it's really no longer yours, like you have to kind of disconnect a little bit and say, now this belongs to the audience, but it's not something that you can experience until you're there and you're in person and you're seeing it happen, which is so powerful. And I think something that our industry does really, really well.
Yeah. And he had a great quote that's saying that the work that they do is so quantum that it doesn't even exist until it's viewed, which is really powerful. And I've got to imagine is really challenging from the production standpoint to really create something out of nothing with the parameters that are set in place, with the objective from the client as the operator, and then the limitations and the budgets and the barriers to get there. And of course, all of the complexities of putting something like this into a physical space and pulling it off flawlessly.
So is this a little bit like if the tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, did it make a sound?
I think so. I think it's exactly like that.
I bet if we had Eric back, he could tell us again. But no, this was a really cool interview. And if you're not familiar with what Mousetrap does, just go to the website mousetrap.com, because you will see so many projects that you're probably familiar with. If you're a theme park nerd or if you're a theme park fan, I'm sure you've seen what they do.
Yeah, they have worked with just the top theme parks and destination attractions in the world. And like you said, it's so amazing to hear the process and all the challenges that come with it, and Eric's philosophy towards bringing it all to life, and really looking forward to getting to this interview.
Well, should we go ahead and get to it?
I'd say let's jump right into the Mousetrap.
Eric, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Great to be here, Matt and Josh. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So excited to kind of jump into this conversation. So Eric, can you first tell us a little bit about yourself and Mousetrap?
Sure. So my name is Eric Hungerford. I'm the president of Mousetrap. Mousetrap is a media design and production studio located in Los Angeles that focuses 100% exclusively on location-based entertainment, large-scale installations. We're not a shop that does film or television work. We call ourselves a niche within a niche, and follow sort of traditional post-production and production pipelines, but our output's much more theatrical. It has to be viewed in a space. It's usually a large format, usually weird configurations, or it's map projected in the middle of a theme park somewhere. So it's very unique stuff, and everything we do is a little bit different each time. So it keeps everybody engaged and interested.
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about your background as well?
Yeah, so I went to film school and wanted to be in the film business, and started out of college. My first job was at Universal theme parks in Orlando. I worked in the park. At the time, Universal was really promoting itself as Hollywood East, right? So they built these state-of-the-art sound stages, and there was a big advertising movement towards, we're going to bring productions to Central Florida. And I thought, well, that's a new market. It'll probably be easier to get in there than New York or LA. So I went down there, worked in the theme park for a while, and then moved over to their production department, which was essentially they would rent out portions of the theme park as a backlot. So you would actually, commercials would come in, music videos would come in, and they'd think they're shooting at a backlot, but they're shooting in the middle of the theme park. So my job was to be the liaison between the production company and the studio operations. So I was equally hated by both venues, right? So, a director's trying to line up a shot, and you got to tell them to stop because the Waterworld show is going on, or I have to tell ops that you can't have people exit this exit of the King Kong attraction because there's a film shoot going on. So it was an interesting look at both, the filmmaking process and the theme park operations process. And from there, one of the shoots I worked on was for Universal Creative. We got along, and they offered me a job at Universal Creative in Los Angeles, whose offices at the time, when Creative was based in Universal City, their offices were one floor below Universal Pictures. So I was like, here's my shot at getting into the film business. But even though it was one floor apart, it was many, many miles between the theme park production company and and Universal Pictures. And then within like 20 months of me starting there, they wanted to move everybody back to Orlando, where I had just come from, and didn't want to do that. So worked independently for a while. A colleague of mine at Universal Creative, Michael Caroni, and I started our own company and did a lot of work for Universal as independent producers and media professionals. And then from there, worked with Thinkwell, and Thinkwell led to the Hedema Group, and the Hedema Group led to Mousetrap. And that's it in a nutshell.
Cool. That's really interesting, and it's interesting, and I say it's a little funny too when you talk about kind of the process of the production that happened inside the theme park as a backlot. Matt and I both also actually worked at Universal Studios, Universal Orlando as well, and I remember walking around and occasionally seeing a production or seeing like the A-frame at the front of the park saying you're walking into a hot set, your likeness may be used in any film, commercial, music video, or whatever it is, and then actually like following up and like seeing like an occasional music video. I feel like I probably see more common than any others, at least as far as from what I've seen, but also television shows and movie sets and things like that. And but it's interesting that you say kind of the headaches of that and kind of the friction points on your end of having the production happen in a live theme park, because obviously there's a lot of value for the guests to show up for a day at a theme park and then being able to see the production of a TV show or a movie or a music video or something like that. But then of course the logistics that you wouldn't have on a movie studio that is not a theme park, and you're able to kind of have that exclusive, full access for that. So going back to Mousetrap, can you talk a little bit about your role as president. What leadership skills have you kind of developed that led to the current role and position that you're in today?
I've had a long relationship with Mousetrap. Even in my previous lives in different companies, I've engaged Mousetrap. Worked with them at Thinkwell and worked with them at the Hedema Group. So I always say it's a credit to Darren Ulmer, who owns and ran Mousetrap for several years, that, how many times does a client want to work for a vendor, right? And so, I always enjoyed, their crew. I liked the way they ran their operations, and it was 100% media focused, which was really my background. Some of the other shops were really design companies that had a media component to it. And so when the opportunity came on to work as a producer for them, I took it and went from producing to sort of business development, trying to really understand holistically where the client needs are, and getting into business development allowed you to see kind of under the hood of why these decisions get made to actually do content, and why content's sort of the last thing that gets engaged, and kind of tracing back where the idea came from and what decisions were made to lead to that decision to do LED versus projection, or it's typically financial or logistical, but really understanding the clients and what their needs and wants are was a good segue now into being president, kind of running the studio on a day-to-day basis, and really understanding the 360-degree view of a project, as opposed to just content or just what the financials are of that RFP or that particular project.
Eric, there's something on the Mousetrap website when the very first thing you say is a quote by Henry David Thoreau. And it says, it's not what you think that matters, it's what you see, which certainly is important in your kind of work. Can you kind of explain maybe how that quote came to be something that was so important to you to put it on the website?
I think it's understanding the context of the content, right? I always say there's something very quantum about the work we do, where it doesn't really exist until it's viewed, and it's only viewed in that particular place at that particular moment. And so we can't, as content creators, you can't work in a bubble. You have to understand all the physical logistics and everything else that goes into the environment in order for the content to seamlessly work. I think that led to that quote. That's sort of our mantra. It's not just what's on the screen, it's what's around it. It's what you did before you got to see that thing and what you're going to do after. Really informs the design of content for us.
That's really interesting. Can you walk us through a little bit of the process that you take from creation to design to production to delivery, kind of those steps along the way of getting from nothing to something?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it's a lot of fact finding. It's a lot of sitting down with the client, with the stakeholders, and really trying to understand not the what, but the why. Like, what's the emotional response you want to elicit from the guest after they've seen the content, and how does that inform the rest of the experience? And then you can really use that as your North Star as you're designing, and really going back to that holistically throughout the process. And from there, it's refining the idea. Typically, it's a 1-sentence log line. We want a 30-minute show that's spectacular. And it's like, okay, well, so let's dive into like what that really means. And every client is different, every stakeholder is different, every audience is different. So who's deciding what is the emotional reaction to something, especially if you're in it for so long? Some of these firms have lived with this conceit for years before it gets executed, and it becomes kind of rote. And you have to always imagine that your audience is really who cares about how this comes across, and trying to imagine looking at it for the first time is key to our design process.
So Eric, I'm curious about that because I think every artist goes through that, right? Whether it's a visual medium or audio. I'm a musician, so it's hard to write a song and then think about what that is going to sound like to someone for the very first time after I've lived with it for so long. So what's the process in trying to get that kind of wide-eyed view of a first-time park goer to see your product and what that's going to be like and what emotion that's going to elicit?
Yeah, so we have certain teams at Mousetrap that are responsible for certain projects, and every so often we'll just bring the whole group together and kind of share what we're doing and get that outside feedback. A lot of times we encourage the client to do the same, like bring in somebody from accounting, have them look at this cut and it does this work for them or not. To define a metric for a creative response is really just folly. I mean, we've been approached by firms who are like, we can measure brainwaves and give you an algorithm that proves out that this will be successful to audiences. And you can't. You really either have to go by experience, kind of gut instinct, and always get that kind of outside view throughout the process so that you're not taking anything for granted.
When you talk about that desired emotional response and using that as the North Star, I think that's really interesting. Can you talk about kind of the spectrum of what that looks like, of types of emotions, and I would say how they differ? Is it a broad range, or is it generally within kind of, you want them to feel connected to it, you want them to feel inspired, you want them to feel like they, I don't know, got value for dollar for their ticket price? Or I'm trying to think of the park's long-term goals out of this as well, and how those emotions then of course dictate many other aspects of it, but kind of really honing in on the examples of types of emotions that you work with.
Yeah, I mean, it's all project dependent. So if it's a nighttime spectacular, for instance, if it is the closing day, this is the last memory the guests are going to have of this space before they leave. And you have to sort of encapsulate everybody's very wildly different experiences in one thing, right? So you want to keep it, positive and joyful. You want to follow the arc of the particular park and make sure that that's reflected in your creative. If you're doing a intro film, you want to set up what the end experience is going to be. You want to almost use it as the, sometimes when we do intro films or intro pieces, we talk about it as the opening credits to a feature film. You want to set the tone and set the flavor, and also put people in the right mindset to experience, whether it's a ride or it's a show or it's something that doesn't have anything to do with the media's effect on that experience matters, and we try our best to make sure that we keep that in mind through the entire process. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Eric, I would imagine that the process is somewhat similar, whether you're designing an attraction or, like on your website, it mentions queues and pre-shows and exhibits and, big spectaculars, but maybe the scale is different, or you've got a slightly different view of what you want that experience to be. Like you said, in the pre-show, you're trying to set the stage and start to tell the story. So are there specific differences in those different facets, or is it kind of a similar process? You just put a different spin on it based on the outcome?
Yeah, I think that's it exactly. It's all outcome related. If we are doing only queue and pre-show for, say, a dark ride, our take is the second you step in line is when the experience begins, right? So even if 80% of the people are blown by that monitor, the 20% that aren't, that informs the decision and the decisions that are made.
Yeah.
What about, I would say, considerations in working in various types of environments? So working, in outdoors, working, a projection on a castle, for instance, versus a completely indoor enclosed environment where I would imagine you've got a little bit more control over the actual elements and the lighting and the visuals. Can you talk about kind of how those differ from certain environments and how that plays into the whole process and the production?
Sure. So if it's a new attraction, say it's an observation deck, and you're doing the pre-show for it, or the intro film for it, it is a controlled environment, and it's great. However, you're always up against that deadline. So you've got construction crews, you've got lighting and electricians, and you're dancing around a bunch of other people who are really trying to do physical work and actually get the thing built, and they're building it up around you. As opposed to doing an outdoor projection show, which is you kind of have the place to yourself because you're doing it overnight, right? You only do those shows at night, and while it's taxing just kind of physically to just be working 3, 4, 5 weeks, all nights, 7 days a week, there's challenges to both. There's challenges to both, and it's preparing for those as you get to those final stages of production to make sure that we know what we want to change on site and we know what we don't want to change on site. So to be able to put that in the planning of the process is key. It's important. We are built for installations. We're a studio that is built with removable render farms and shippable render farms. So we'll typically get a show to 80 or 90% and then go on site and finish it. And again, going back to that sort of quantum aspect of the show, you can previs all you want. You can build as many physical models and mock-ups as you want, but until you're there standing in that space, and hearing it for the first time and kind of feeling the vibe of the place, you're never going to really know. So to give yourselves that flexibility to make those last adjustments in the actual venue is key to the successful projects that we've done.
So I just have to ask, what's a render farm?
Okay. It's a series of computers that are linked together to be able to process content, right? So if we have various elements of visual effects that are composited together, the computers are the ones crunching that data to make it one holistic image and then outputting the final piece. So instead of sending something back and talking to a team of artists that are sitting in a studio somewhere when you're in New York and they're in LA or you're somewhere else, actually having everybody on site and working through that tends to get the best product out there.
Gotcha.
When you have a client approach you, or when you're starting to work with a venue, whether it's a theme park or an attraction or an observation deck, what are some of the things that they should be thinking about that maybe they wouldn't necessarily think of intuitively because it's not their area of expertise? Of course, it's why they're bringing you in, but things that should be on their mind to make sure that the project goes off successfully and with as minimal friction as possible.
A lot of it goes to the AV integration and the decisions of what the display mechanism is going to be. It's really hard on a client end to predict 2.5 years out what's going to be the best, most robust technology that's going to be installed, but sometimes they have to make those decisions. So, we like to get brought into the process as early as possible. That's rarely possible because, there's costs involved and people have budgets to manage. And, it's the lead time on complex media distribution and display systems is so long that you need to kind of lock yourselves into those decisions early. But having some sort of vetting process or some sort of even design sprint to talk through those with the content creators is a step that often gets overlooked and then can sometimes can save a lot of heartache down the line if firms like ours are approached in that design phase of a project.
Eric, I want to go back to something you mentioned at the very beginning where you said that Mousetrap is 100% exclusively for location-based entertainment. And I think you said you're not a film production facility. Is that what you mean, kind of being a niche within a niche? And why is that so important that you're exclusively for location-based entertainment?
There's just a bunch of institutional knowledge when you try to understand how a piece of content plays in a 3-dimensional environment as opposed to on television or on a 16:9 frame. The methodology is different. The storytelling aspects of it are different. And, we try to take that as a positive, right? The workflow is different. The budgets are a lot different, and the schedules are a lot different. So, understanding what you're getting into is key for us.
Cool. With the configurations that you've worked with, are there any that stand out as being some of the most obscure or challenging, just from a three-dimensional space that maybe turn into phenomenal case studies of look what we can do and look where we're able to do it onto this actual physical space?
Yeah. So even before I started at Mousetrap, I worked with them for the kind of intro statement for One World Observatory. And part of that was a 144 panel video display that stretched an entire hallway. And to be able to tell a story across that hallway at a resolution that was like 30,000K, it was like insane, the resolution that needed, and just the technical considerations of how to break that up and how to involve the piece involved interviews with people who were responsible for building One World Trade Center. And so there's an emotional component to it. So you want to find that balance of being able to get the human story across in this very complex display mechanism without having people get either distracted by how strange this kind of configuration is, or so wrapped up in it that it didn't matter that it was that configuration of 144 LED panels against the wall with a reflective floor, which then bounced light everywhere.
That sounds cool.
Yeah.
But that actually brings up maybe an interesting question, is that with all the complex technology that you use and the new ways to tell a story and project images, how do you make sure that we're not just looking at it because it's technology and cool, but and that's not getting in the way, we're following the story? Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
making sure that the technology isn't the story, that the story is the story.
Yeah, it goes back to 2 points I made earlier, which is find out what the core is, what the point of the content. Content for content's sake is never going to work, right? I've been on shows where it's like, well, we bought 25 monitors, so we need 25 pieces of media, and that's never going to work. It's never going to work at the end of the day of being a very compelling experience. And then it's if you're involved early enough, it's avoiding doing technology for technology's sake. Building something to the newest, brightest, shiniest object is never going to work, because guys, by the time that thing's open, that technology is out of date, right? So just find out what you want your intention to be, and then let's find the best, smartest technology to display that intent.
Yeah.
So with that said, are there any projects where you intentionally perhaps dismissed some technology in the interest of better storytelling to ensure that it wasn't content for content's sake or tech for tech's sake, even if there would have been a more technologically advanced way of doing something, that the best approach was actually maybe a simpler or more low-tech approach?
A lot of times, interactivity is a big buzzword, especially in content. So it's like, let's have user activated content. And so when people pulse into the room, that's when the content will start. And it's going to be this very complex infrastructure. Or it's like, well, why don't we just time it out? Why don't we time it out, pre-bake it in, and then on some days we run it every 3 minutes. Some days we run it every 5 minutes, and then it kind of works itself out, and you save this enormous amount of headache and cost. To say that for the sole purpose of putting in a marketing brochure somewhere, this is an interactive exhibit, as opposed to just this is an exhibit. Mm-hmm. So we've had those arguments and then discussions before with clients.
Arguments first, then discussions. Eric, I'm also curious, because you do work with such high technology, and it takes so long to get let's say an attraction or an exhibit, from the design phase through the execution phase, that when you get on site, and hopefully it will have the response that you want, but when the real audience is in there and it doesn't, or maybe that hasn't happened, but maybe it has, where the audience doesn't react the way you think they will, what happens then?
Honestly, I can't think of an example of where that's happened recently. I will tell a tale. Hopefully it's not out of school, from my Universal Creative days, where part of what we had to do was content for Universal Studios Japan. And they did this big special effects movie show. And they showed it for the audience for the first time, and it had this very rousing conclusion, and it was dead silence in the theater. So everyone started to panic, thinking this show was a bomb. The show just isn't working. And really, it was a cultural thing. It was that audience, that particular culture does not clap or show kind of physical emotion. They still love the show. It got great reviews and stuff, but understanding if there really is a problem, it's probably been noticed before we get to opening day, with the amount and the various levels of stakeholders on these complex projects, but also just keeping in mind where you're at and who the audience is, and understanding that.
Yeah.
So with that said, then what is the ultimate measure of success of the response from a show or a project? And that may differ geographically and with cultural norms or traditions, or just in general of being able to kind of quantify how successful this particular project was, kind of benchmarking across others or across comparisons.
I mean, that's the $1 million question. It's how do you justify the budget for a piece of content that's one piece of a larger experience? I think it's audience satisfaction. It's audience response. If you're hearing about it on social media, if you're getting the ops feedback that people really love this piece and want to come back and see it again, that's sort of the measure of success, I think, for both us and the client.
So Eric, again, with all the technology and things that you guys incorporate and you get to work with on a daily basis, when you go someplace, whether it's an exhibit or a theme park, what impresses you?
Content where there is content that's invisible, content where I can't tell how it's being displayed. Sometimes it could be anything from an immersive theatrical performance or a major theme park, but understanding, like, I know where the seams are on a lot of these things, and if I can spot the seams, I'm like, okay, I see what they did there. But if I can't spot those seams, I want to know why and how they did it, but they won't tell me because usually it's not us who did it.
Yeah.
It's almost like a magician going to a magic show. So, I can pick that out. So kind of taking that and maybe merging the last few questions together, but kind of putting a little bit of a different spin on it, is when you do travel or when you do see one of your projects in action or something that you've had a hand in creating, what are you watching? Are you watching the show, or are you watching the people watching the show? And what are you looking for?
We'll watch it twice. We'll watch the show because we want to make sure that, like, the projector is still bright enough, or like it's in sync, and we will watch the audience, and you can feel it. You can feel it in a crowd if something's landing or not. And we do tend to do that, go back and then try to avoid if I had only done this, or if I had to do this over again, I'd change this. But that's a dangerous game to play.
Yeah. Do you have any of those stories that you're able to share? Like, I wish I could have done that, or wish I had done that, or do you try not to get to the point where you're second guessing yourself at the end of the project?
Yeah, you can't really, because it's out in the world at that point. I remember the first time doing a pretty big project, and the moment it no longer becomes yours. it's theirs, right? And you were hired to do a job, and you put a lot of heart and soul and sweat and tears and love into it, and then it's not yours anymore. It's theirs, and then it's the audience's. So there's nothing you can do at that point. But think fondly on it, and try not to second guess yourself.
Yeah.
But you can take that, and if you are in that mindset, which hopefully you're able to avoid, I imagine you're able to use it productively and kind of funnel it into the next project that you can now continually refine and continually improve. Can you talk a little bit about that? Or I would say from the whether maybe it's not necessarily the evolution of technology, that's probably another question we could get into too, but from a process standpoint of saying, kind of making sure that each project is better and better, and there's the continual aspect of improvement.
I think there's definitely been an evolution of the map to projection project that the studio has done from its inception to now. And a lot of it in the early days became, can I get enough light on this structure to see anything, right? And so, okay, I can see stuff. And then it became, all right, how do I make it, very compelling and creatively interesting? And then it became, look, there's a reason you chose this structure to project on. That characteristics, those architectural characteristics, have to be part of the design of the show. You can't take a structure and have it just project imagery on it, and because then you're just using it as a weird screen, a screen that doesn't quite make sense. So to really look at the architecture of the structure, understand almost from a theatrical point of view what that structure means and why the design of that structure played into that, and then play to the strengths of that architecture. I think you could see the evolution of our content getting more and more sophisticated as it moved on. And it wasn't really technology. It's really just approach. It's approach and design. Projectors are brighter, servers are faster, but really it's the why that matters. Why you're putting this particular shot on this particular building, and does it make sense for the emotional residency of the show?
Yeah. So Eric, this may be kind of a big picture question, but I've heard a lot of people talk about creativity, and that, if the sky is the limit, if you've got so many options, that creativity becomes difficult because you just don't know where to go. And sometimes putting limitations on yourself actually can make you more creative. Are there certain things that you all do to kind of tap into the creativity, or is it something that you've got a process for? I'm just kind of curious about that sort of ideation process that you guys go through.
So yeah, I mean, I came from sort of an indie background, So after I left Universal Creative, we were pretty scrappy, and it was it came down to, if you go over budget on this, that's money out of your pocket. Like, we would sit there, my partner and I, actually count out, this is how much money this is going to cost us if we screw this up. So let's think of a different way to do it, so you still get the same response. And I've never been given a budget that I'm like, oh, we got this. What are we going to do with all this money? They're always pretty tight, and you always have to think about very creative ways to push the envelope, because at the end of the day, your potential clients and your audiences aren't like, you know what, that show was amazing for the money they spent on it. That show was either amazing or it wasn't. And it's a very competitive marketplace. It's a very competitive field that we're in. And so, we're always pushing ourselves to do more for less. Not if there's any clients out there that we can do more for less,
but. So I kind of maybe touching on kind of a little bit of what we were talking about a few minutes ago, as far as measuring the audience response, which you just kind of said is binary. Either they enjoyed it or they didn't, or it was worth seeing or it wasn't. From the client side, as far as being able to prove the ROI, to say this is the budget and you're going to get this back in some way, shape, or form, even though what you're doing, they're not revenue generating productions, and I imagine they're very high cost too. So being able to say this is how you're able to get this back, whether it's length of stay in the park or is it souvenirs you can sell right around the time of the show that are able to kind of feed into that? What are some of those KPIs that help justify the ROI to implement this?
I think a lot with the advent of social media, it's what's the Instagrammable moment. What's the picture that you don't need to bring in a professional film crew now to document your attraction. The audience is going to do that for you. And one of those things takes off or becomes your signature look or piece. That gets you a lot of ROI right there, right then and there. It's the discourse. It's the audience discourse on an attraction. For some of the bigger theme parks, there are fans that are extremely vocal about what they like and don't like, and there are people that have are taken very seriously in that sphere. And so, not that we do fan service all the time, but we do audience service, and it's paid out pretty well for us so far.
Yeah, you brought up something interesting, because I think there are some fans out there that are very loud, right, on social media, but maybe your general public isn't as loud, but they're really the ones that you're creating that show for. So how do you maybe balance those loud people that may be less excited about your product versus the hundreds of thousands of people who love it that may not say much?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see it in just the audience surveys that are going out. So and so on Twitter hated this show, and there's 1,000 tweets a day about it. But our audience satisfaction metrics are through the roof. So that balances out.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point too, because especially with social media and with our communication channels these days, it's very easy to be a critic. It can be very easy to see something and then just be the one who decides, was this good, was this not, and then kind of balancing that. Like you said, it's important to measure with saying, okay, these are what the enthusiasts say who might, feel a little bit more elite in some cases, and we don't need to go down that route. But here's what the general public and the mass amount of your admission dollars is coming from, and in many cases they may not be as loud, but they are able to. They are louder in general with the more aggregate than enthusiasts who might have a large following on social media, but actually carry a much smaller portion of the attendance. And they go back and they see it anyway, and they do it anyway again. And even though they might say something and they don't have the experience to back up any criticism and critique. How often do you spend, scrolling through Twitter or seeing what people say, whether it's from the general public or whether it's from the bloggers and the enthusiasts who feel like they can, bring themselves up by putting projects down without knowing the hours and the dollars and the energy and resources behind it all?
Yeah, when I was doing business development, I would do it a lot. I'd like to see where where things were working, where things weren't. Now I tend not to. It's sort of like what the job is. You did. The studio produced what we said we were going to produce. Everybody's happy. You can't get into that do loop of obsessing over some random tweet or thing on Instagram or whatever. So at the same time, if you're not going to take negative, you can't take the positive. So you just have to sort of, it's out there. Every now and then somebody will forward me something and it'll be positive, and it's like, yeah, great. But, we don't take too much stock in that.
Yeah. Eric, I'd like to go way, way back. So you kind of talked us through starting at Universal and things like that. What was it about like being in the film business and the media creation business that really got you excited, and kind of how did your maybe early experiences drive you to that conclusion of that's what you wanted to do?
I mean, I've always been a total movie nerd. I loved films. I'm a total cinephile. So being at Universal, the theme park where, movies came to life, there was, back in the day, probably nobody even remembers this, there was like an Alfred Hitchcock exhibit at Universal Orlando that was like really amazing. And like they did the birds in 3D and they talked about filmmaking, and it was like, this is this is my scene for sure, right? And then it just sort of evolved, from traditional filmmaking to this kind of work where I actually find it more satisfying. There are probably I dabbled a little bit in independent film, and I guarantee you there is a show somewhere that has had more eyeballs on it than any indie film that can be looked on your phone or anything like that. Now that content's so ubiquitous, what makes a piece of content special is you actually have to go out and see it. And with the decline in movie theaters and just everyone's got a ton of entertainment at their fingertips, really utilizing that opportunity to tell a story in a unique space, I think is very exciting, and is sort of the evolution of media entertainment.
So taking this a little bit deeper as we kind of get a little bit towards the end of the interview here, when you talk about telling stories in this type of space, and even tying back to what you were saying earlier of that emotional response that you're getting from the visitor, it's really powerful. And why is it so important to be telling stories, whether it's in location-based entertainment or whether it's in film? And as far as what do you see as kind of your importance in moving people and inspiring people and creating that emotional impact on people when they're at a theme park or at an attraction or at a location-based venue?
It's really the whole experience of whatever this venue is, whether it's a theme park or an observation deck. We don't ever think that anyone goes to a theme park to see a media-based show, right? It has to be an organic part of storytelling, but not the part of storytelling, right? So we are just one piece of the puzzle. And I think if we, see ourselves that way and see ourselves as a fit to a larger story, it makes it more engaging for the guest and more engaging for us, honestly, to get excited about it and to do it. I think you're gonna see we are seeing this transition from passive to active entertainment. And one part of that is just getting in the car and going someplace to see something, and seeing it as a group and seeing it with a group of people, especially now that the kind of theatrical model is not what it used to be. Experiencing something collectively is powerful, and to be a part of that is really an honor for us, honestly. And we just see ourselves as one piece of that. One small piece of that.
Very cool. Well, Eric, this has been a fascinating conversation, and we really appreciate your time. If people wanted to know more about you or Mousetrap, where would you send them?
Yep, you can go to mousetrap.com. Mousetrap is the French spelling, MOUSETRAPPE.com. Mousetrap is also part of a new group called Medici XD, which is the Medici Experience Design. That is a joint venture between Darren Ulmer, who started Mousetrap, and Chuck Fawcett. And you can go to medicixd.com to learn more about them.
Awesome.
Where did the name Mousetrap come from?
It came from an old, no. That's a question for Darren Ulmer. I think it came from an offshoot of the work that he had done at Disney, and it goes to the old saying, "Build a better mousetrap," right? And just trying to think of new and interesting ways to solve problems. But I will tell you that we do get about 3 phone calls a week looking for exterminators. So
that could be another line of business one day.
Yeah. Name change might be in order at some point. So.
Excellent. Eric, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and learn all about Mousetrap and about what you do. And for everyone out there who is watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.
Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release, and even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit attractionpros.com.